Hi, I'm Lauren Mitchell, and I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart for months. You know how sometimes you think you understand the family you married into, and then one moment changes everything? That's what happened to me. My story isn't about heroes or villains. It's about what happens when money and love collide in the most painful way possible. Sometimes truth doesn't break families. It reveals who was already breaking them. It started 3 weeks after David's father passed away. We gathered in that familiar living room where I'd spent 8 years of holidays and celebrations. The will reading should have been simple. The house to David, savings split between the kids. But when the lawyer mentioned outstanding mortgage payments, something shifted in the room like air being sucked out. I watched faces change as numbers that didn't make sense started filling the space between us. Patricia, David's mother, sat perfectly still on her usual spot on the cream sofa. Her hands folded in her lap, that practiced smile never wavering, but I caught something in her eyes that made my stomach tighten. She looked genuinely surprised, as if this was shocking news to her too. The lawyer kept talking about missed payments and late fees, debt on a house that should have been free and clear years ago. Something felt wrong. "There must be some mistake," Patricia said, her voice carrying that authority she'd perfected over 30 years of being the family matriarch. Richard was meticulous about finances. He would never let house payments fall behind. She turned to David with that look that always made him straighten his shoulders, ready to fix whatever needed fixing. But this time, even David looked lost, running his hands through his hair the way he did when overwhelmed. The lawyer gently explained that the mortgage had been refinanced multiple times over 5 years. Each time, more equity had been pulled out, more money borrowed against the house. The original loan that should have been finished was now massive debt, threatening to swallow the property whole. I watched David's face crumble as he realized his inheritance had become a financial burden instead of the security his father had intended for him. Patricia's composure never cracked, not even when the devastating numbers became clear. $200,000 in debt, payments 3 months behind, foreclosure proceedings already started. She nodded thoughtfully, as if hearing about someone else's problems. "Well, we'll figure this out. Families always do," she said finally. But something about her tone made me wonder what she already knew that we didn't. The certainty felt rehearsed somehow. That night, David paced our bedroom until nearly 2 in the morning. I don't understand how this happened. Dad was so careful with money. He taught me to balance a checkbook before I was 12. I wanted to comfort him, to find words that would make this easier, but I was struggling with my own growing suspicion. There was more to this story than any of us understood, and I couldn't shake the feeling we weren't getting the whole truth. The next few days blurred together with phone calls and document reviews. Patricia threw herself into helping, showing up at the lawyer's office with boxes of paperwork and determination that seemed almost too intense. She insisted on being involved in every decision about saving the house. "This home has been in our family for 25 years. We can't just let it go without a fight." Her passion felt real, but underneath it, I sensed something desperate and controlling. I started paying attention to details I'd never noticed before. How Patricia's hands shook slightly when she talked about the mortgage. How she always had explanations ready before anyone asked questions. How she kept steering conversations away from specifics about when the problem started. David was too overwhelmed to notice these small tells, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his mother wasn't just helping. She was managing the narrative, keeping us from seeing something important. 2 weeks into this financial nightmare, I got the phone call that changed everything. I was at work, trying to focus on quarterly reports when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, there was silence, then someone hanging up. Strange, but not unusual enough to worry about. What bothered me was how familiar that split second of breathing sounded before the line went dead. It nagged at me all day. Later that evening, I was cleaning out old voicemails when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Mixed in with messages from my sister and appointment reminders was a recording that wasn't meant for me. Patricia's voice, strained and desperate, talking to someone about payment arrangements and debt consolidation. She was begging, actually begging someone to help her figure out a way to hide what she'd done. The desperation in her voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. The voicemail was clearly a mistake, meant for someone else but somehow ending up in my messages. As I listened to Patricia's shaking voice plead with what sounded like a bank manager, I realized she wasn't just involved in this financial mess. She was the cause of it. Every loan, every refinance, every missed payment had her signature. She'd been slowly bleeding David's inheritance dry for years, funding something she couldn't tell her husband about. I sat in my car in our driveway for an hour that night, playing the message repeatedly. Patricia's words painted a picture of gambling debts and secret credit cards, of borrowing against David's future to pay for mistakes she couldn't confess. The house wasn't just in trouble. It had been mortgaged to death to fund her hidden life. How do you tell your husband that his mother has been deceiving the entire family for years, including his dying father? David was already asleep when I finally went inside, exhausted from another day of trying to save his childhood home. I lay next to him, listening to his steady breathing and knowing I was about to shatter his image of his mother forever. The woman who'd raised him to believe in honesty and responsibility had been living a lie. How do you hand someone that kind of betrayal? How do you destroy someone's faith in the person who shaped their values? For 3 days, I carried that secret like a stone in my chest. I watched Patricia continue her performance, saw her comfort David when he worried about losing the house, listened to her blame banks and lawyers and anyone except herself. Every time she patted his hand and promised everything would work out, I felt physically sick. She was so convincing that I almost started doubting what I'd heard. Maybe I'd misunderstood somehow. The confrontation finally came on a Sunday afternoon when we gathered to discuss the lawyer's latest suggestions. Patricia had made her famous pot roast, the same recipe she used for every family crisis since I'd known her. We sat around that familiar table when David started talking about selling our own house to help save his father's. The generosity in his voice, his willingness to sacrifice our future for what he thought was family legacy, broke something inside me. "You don't need to sell anything," I said quietly, and suddenly every conversation stopped. Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and David turned to look at me with confused hope. "There's something you both need to know about how this debt actually happened." The air in the room shifted, thick with truth that was about to change everything between us. I could see Patricia's face draining of color. I pulled out my phone with hands that weren't quite steady. Patricia's eyes met mine, and I could see she knew exactly what I was about to do. "Mom," David said, and I heard a question in his voice that he wasn't ready to ask. The voicemail felt heavy in my palm, like holding someone's entire life. I'd been hoping she'd find courage to tell David herself, but time had run out for gentle revelations. "Before I play this," I said, looking directly at Patricia, "I want you to know I never wanted it to come to this. I've been hoping you'd find a way to tell David yourself." Patricia's mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked smaller somehow, vulnerable, human in a way that made me almost sorry for what I was about to reveal to her son. The voicemail played in the silence of that Sunday dinner, Patricia's desperate voice filling the room where we'd shared so many happy memories. David's face went through a dozen emotions as he listened to his mother beg a stranger to help hide the truth from her family. When it ended, the quiet that followed felt like the space between lightning and thunder, loaded with something devastating about to break over us all. "How long?" David's voice was barely a whisper. Patricia sat frozen, tears finally starting to track down her cheeks, all her careful composure finally cracking. "How long have you been taking money from Dad's house?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, as if the truth was too enormous to fit through words. The weight of years of deception settled over the table like dust. What came next wasn't anger or shouting. It was something quieter and more heartbreaking. David's disappointment filled the room like smoke, touching everything, changing the taste of the air we were breathing. Patricia finally started talking, words tumbling out about debts and mistakes and choices that had snowballed beyond her control. But explanations felt too little, too late to fix what had been shattered between them. "You're ruining this family," Patricia said suddenly, turning to me with eyes that blazed with desperate anger. This was between David and me. You had no right to interfere in our private business." Her words cut through the room, sharp enough to silence everyone else. She looked at me as if every crack in their perfect facade was somehow my fault, as if exposing lies was worse than living them for years. For a moment, I almost believed her. The conviction in her voice was so strong, so certain, that doubt crept in around the edges. Maybe I should have stayed quiet, let them work it out privately, protected family peace instead of insisting on truth. But then I looked at David's face and saw relief mixed with his pain. Truth, even devastating truth, was better than living inside someone else's carefully constructed lie. "No," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just showing you who was ruining it all along." The words hung in the air between us, and I knew our family would never be the same. But maybe that wasn't entirely bad. Maybe some families need to break a little before they can learn to be honest with each other, to build something real instead of something perfect. The silence that followed my words stretched longer than seemed humanly possible. Patricia's face had gone from angry to something I'd never seen before, defeated maybe, or just finally tired of holding up the weight of her lies. David sat between us like he was watching his entire childhood get rewritten in real time. The pot roast was getting cold, but nobody seemed to notice. Food felt irrelevant when your whole world was shifting underneath you. Patricia was the first to break, not with more anger or accusations, but with something that looked almost like relief. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. And suddenly she sounded like a different person entirely. Gone was the commanding matriarch who'd run family dinners and Christmas mornings for decades. In her place sat a woman who looked older than her 62 years, shoulders curved inward like she was protecting something fragile. "It started small," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Just a few $100s when the refrigerator broke and Richard was between jobs. The house had so much equity, and the bank made it sound so easy." David leaned forward, and I could see him trying to piece together a timeline in his head. When had his father been between jobs? Had there been financial stress he'd never known about? I wanted to reach for David's hand, but something told me this moment needed to belong to him and his mother. Patricia kept talking, words spilling out like water through a broken dam. "Then it was the roof, and your dad's medical bills that insurance didn't cover, and somehow every emergency seemed to need just a little more money. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed." The gambling came last in her confession, spoken like a shameful afterthought. It was supposed to be a way to make money faster, to catch up on everything I owed. "The casino has these programs for people like me. They make you feel special, important. They convinced me I could win back what I'd borrowed." Her hands were shaking now, and I found myself feeling sorry for this woman who'd just called me a family destroyer. David's response surprised me. Instead of anger or accusations, he just looked exhausted. "Mom, why didn't you tell Dad? Why didn't you tell me? We could have helped you figure something out." The pain in his voice wasn't about the money. It was about the lies, about being shut out of a crisis that affected all of them. Trust, I was learning, was more fragile than any house. "Your father was so proud of what we'd built," Patricia said, tears flowing freely now. "He worked 2 jobs for years to pay off that mortgage early. How could I tell him I'd gambled it all away? How could I admit I'd thrown away his life's work for nothing?" The weight of carrying that secret alone must have been crushing, but it didn't excuse the damage she'd caused. Over the following weeks, our family began the slow process of rebuilding from honesty instead of perfection. Patricia moved in with David's sister temporarily while she attended gambling addiction meetings and financial counseling. The house went into foreclosure anyway. There was too much debt and too little time, but something unexpected happened in its place. We started talking to each other about real things instead of just surface pleasantries. David struggled the most with reconciling the mother he'd known with the person who'd been secretly destroying their family's foundation. "I keep thinking about all the times she lectured me about responsibility," he told me one night. All those lessons about honesty and hard work while she was lying to everyone. It wasn't just about the money. It was about discovering that his moral compass had been set by someone who wasn't following true north. I found myself in an unexpected position as the keeper of family truth. Patricia's siblings started calling me, wanting to know what had really happened, as if the voicemail wasn't clear enough. Some blamed me for not handling it privately. Others thanked me for finally exposing what they'd suspected for years. Family loyalty, it turned out, meant different things to different people, and not all of them involved protecting lies. The hardest part wasn't the financial mess or even the lost house. It was watching David grieve the mother he thought he'd known. She was still alive, still present, but the version of her that had existed in his mind was gone forever. "I feel like I need to mourn her," he told me one evening, "but she's sitting right there." Grief for the living is a special kind of pain that doesn't come with closure. Patricia and I had our own reckoning about a month after that terrible Sunday dinner. She asked to meet me for coffee, just the two of us, in neutral territory away from family dynamics. "I owe you an apology," she said, before I'd even sat down. "What I said about you ruining the family, that was my fear talking, not my truth." She looked smaller in the bright cafe light, more human than she'd ever seemed. "I was terrified," she continued, stirring her coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "Not just about David finding out, but about losing the only identity I'd ever had. I was the responsible one, the one who held everything together. If I wasn't that person, then who was I?" Her question hung between us, and I realized we were having the first genuinely honest conversation of our 8-year relationship. I told her about carrying the secret for those 3 days, about how much I'd hated knowing something that would hurt her son. "I kept hoping you'd find the courage to tell him yourself," I said. "I never wanted to be the messenger." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw her not as David's intimidating mother, but as a woman who'd made terrible choices and was trying to figure out how to live with them. "You saved him," she said quietly, "from making the same mistakes I did, from sacrificing his future for my past." It was a strange gift, her gratitude, but one that helped heal something I didn't even realize had been damaged in me. Standing up for truth shouldn't require forgiveness from the person you've exposed, but somehow having it made the guilt I'd been carrying feel lighter. The family dynamics shifted in ways none of us expected. David's relationship with his mother became more honest, but also more distant, at least initially. Without the performance of perfectness, they had to learn how to relate to each other as flawed humans rather than idealized roles. It was messy and sometimes painful, but it was real in a way their relationship had never been before. We ended up moving across town to a smaller place, but one that was entirely ours without the weight of hidden debt or secret shame. David planted a garden in our tiny backyard, something he'd never done at his childhood home because it had always felt too perfect to disturb. "I want to grow something that's actually mine," he told me, hands deep in soil that held no family secrets. Patricia's recovery wasn't linear or simple. There were setbacks and moments of crisis, times when the urge to gamble felt stronger than her commitment to honesty. But she kept showing up to meetings, kept working with her counselor, kept trying to rebuild trust one small truth at a time. Healing from addiction while grieving the loss of your family's respect is a special kind of challenge that requires more courage than I'd ever given her credit for. The strangest thing was how other family secrets started surfacing once Patricia's truth was out. David's uncle admitted to his own gambling problem. A cousin revealed years of hiding depression. It was as if one person's honesty had given permission for others to stop pretending everything was fine. Truth, it turned out, was contagious in the best possible way, even when it was painful. I learned things about myself through this crisis that I'm still processing. I discovered I was stronger than I'd thought, capable of holding hard truths and making difficult choices for the good of people I loved. I also learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's lies, even when exposing them feels like cruelty in the moment. The house sold at auction 6 months later for less than it was worth. Patricia insisted on using her share of the proceeds to pay down some of the debt she'd created, though it barely made a dent. "It's not about the math," she told David. "It's about taking responsibility for what I can control now." Small gestures toward accountability, but they mattered in ways that larger dramatic apologies never could have. David and I started going to couples counseling, not because our marriage was in trouble, but because we'd realized how many things we'd never talked about honestly. Family money, expectations about inheritance, how to handle secrets, all the topics that polite couples dance around until crisis forces conversation. We were learning to build intimacy from truth, instead of just shared experiences and good intentions. A year later, Patricia has her own small apartment and a part-time job at a nonprofit that helps families navigate financial crisis. I'm good at it because I understand how people get in over their heads, she told me recently. There's something both heartbreaking and hopeful about watching someone transform their biggest shame into their greatest source of empathy for others facing similar struggles. The relationship between Patricia and David is still being rebuilt, but it's built on different foundation now. They talk about money openly, about struggles and fears and the pressure of trying to be perfect for people you love. It's not the easy warmth they used to share, but it's more honest. And sometimes honesty is worth more than comfort, even when it comes at such a painful cost. What I've learned from all of this is that families are more fragile and more resilient than we think. They can survive devastating truth, but they can't survive in lies indefinitely. The version of our family that existed before that terrible Sunday dinner is gone forever, but what we're building in its place feels stronger somehow. Like a house rebuilt after a fire with better materials and more honest blueprints for the foundation. Looking back now, 18 months after that devastating Sunday dinner, I can see how naive I was about what would happen after the truth came out. I thought confession would lead to forgiveness to healing, and healing to some version of normal. But real life doesn't follow the neat arc of redemption stories. Sometimes truth just clears the ground so you can see what you're actually working with, and what we were working with was more complicated than anyone expected. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a simple recovery came 3 months after Patricia moved out. David started having what he called trust attacks, moments when he'd question everything I told him, not because I'd lied, but because his ability to believe people had been fundamentally shaken. If my mom could lie about something that big for that long, how do I know anyone is telling me the truth? It was heartbreaking to watch someone I loved lose faith in human honesty because of my own insistence on it. I hadn't anticipated becoming the family's designated truth teller, but that's exactly what happened. Relatives started coming to me with their problems, their secrets, their financial troubles, as if I'd been appointed some kind of confessor. "Lauren will know what to do," they'd say, and I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being trusted with information I never asked for. Truth-telling, it turns out, is a burden that multiplies once people know you're capable of it. The hardest calls came from Patricia herself, usually late at night when her resolve was weakest. "I almost went to the casino today," she'd tell me, her voice small and scared. "I drove to the parking lot and sat there for an hour." These conversations felt surreal. The woman who'd once blamed me for destroying her family now calling me when she needed someone to talk her back from the edge. Trust is a strange thing. Sometimes it grows strongest in the places where it's been most damaged. David's grief process was nothing like I expected. Instead of anger or sadness, he went through phases of almost obsessive research about gambling addiction, financial fraud, family secrets. Our dining room table became covered with printouts and library books, as if understanding the science behind his mother's behavior could somehow undo the years of lies. "Did you know that casinos pump specific scents into their ventilation systems to make people gamble longer?" he'd tell me, as if facts could heal the wound that betrayal had left. What surprised me most was how our own relationship deepened through this crisis. Before Patricia's revelation, David and I had what I thought was a strong marriage, but it was built on the assumption that we came from similar, stable backgrounds. Learning that his family foundation was actually quicksand made him cling to our partnership in new ways. We started having conversations about money, about family expectations, about the lies we tell ourselves that we'd never thought to discuss before. The extended family's reaction evolved in waves that I hadn't predicted. Initially, there was shock and sympathy for David. But as months passed, some relatives began suggesting that maybe I should have handled things more privately. Family reunions became minefields of half-conversations and meaningful looks, as if I'd violated some unspoken code about keeping family business internal. Apparently, there's a difference between truth and appropriate truth that I'd never learned to navigate. Patricia's recovery journey became unexpectedly public when she decided to attend a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in our small town. Word spread quickly through the community networks that all small towns have, and suddenly everyone knew about our family crisis. The cashier at the grocery store would give me sympathetic looks, neighbors would ask pointed questions about how everyone was doing, and I realized that choosing truth means choosing to live without the protection of privacy. 6 months in, David's sister Emma asked if she could move back to town to help with Patricia's recovery. Emma had been living in Portland for 10 years, building a career and a life completely separate from family drama, but she felt guilty about not being there during the crisis. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's gambling addiction was bringing the family together geographically, even as it was tearing apart their emotional connections. Emma's return complicated our carefully rebuilt family dynamics in ways I hadn't anticipated. She'd missed the worst of the revelations and Patricia's initial breakdown, so she arrived with more sympathy and less protective anger than David carried. "Mom's sick, not evil," Emma would say. And while that was probably true, it minimized the very real damage that Patricia's choices had caused. Different perspectives on the same truth created new tensions we hadn't expected. The financial aftermath kept revealing new complications long after I thought we'd seen everything. Credit cards Patricia had opened in David's name surfaced 7 months later. A second mortgage on the house that no one knew about appeared in legal documents. Each new discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, proof that even after confession, we still didn't know the full scope of what we were dealing with. Truth, I learned, often comes in installments rather than all at once. I found myself becoming protective of Patricia in ways that confused everyone, including me. When David's anger would flare up over some new financial discovery, I'd catch myself defending her, explaining addiction and shame and the psychological spiral she'd been trapped in. The woman I'd exposed was also the woman I'd started to understand, and understanding made it harder to sustain the clear moral position I'd felt when I first played that voicemail. Our new Sunday dinners were awkward affairs that we kept trying to make work. Patricia would cook, but simpler meals that didn't carry the weight of tradition. David would be polite, but distant. Emma would try too hard to create warmth that felt forced. I'd sit there watching all of us perform normalcy we hadn't figured out how to actually feel. Some family rhythms, once broken, resist easy repair no matter how much everyone wants them back. The gambling counselor Patricia worked with suggested family therapy sessions, and those became our strangest hour each week. Sitting in a circle talking about trust and boundaries and enabling behavior, while Patricia cried and David stared out the window, and Emma took notes like she was studying for a test on functional families. The therapist kept using words like healing journey that made us all uncomfortable, but somehow we kept showing up. Money became a different language in our house after everything came out. David and I started having weekly budget meetings, not because we needed them financially, but because transparency about money had become a way of maintaining trust between us. "I spent $40 on groceries," I'd report, and he'd tell me about buying coffee, as if small honesty could protect us from larger deceptions. It felt silly but necessary. Patricia's job at the nonprofit turned into something more meaningful than any of us expected. She started leading support groups for families affected by gambling addiction, and hearing her help other people navigate the wreckage of similar situations was both healing and heartbreaking. "I can't fix what I did to you," she told David after one of her meetings, "but maybe I can help other families catch it sooner." Purpose built from ruin, but purpose nonetheless. The anniversary of that terrible Sunday dinner passed without acknowledgement from anyone, but I know we were all thinking about it. A year of rebuilding trust, of learning new ways to be family, of accepting that some kinds of damage leave permanent marks even when forgiveness is possible. We weren't the same people sitting around that table, and maybe that wasn't entirely bad. David's relationship with his father's memory grew complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. He'd always idealized his dad, but learning that Patricia had hidden so much from him made David wonder what else about their marriage he'd misunderstood. Did Dad really not know? Or was he choosing not to see? He'd ask me. And I never knew how to answer. Some questions about the past resist simple resolution. Emma moved back into our old orbit permanently, taking a local teaching job and renting a small house 3 blocks from ours. Having her nearby meant Patricia had more family support, but it also meant our crisis became a daily reality rather than something we could process privately. Some healing happens better in solitude. Some requires the messy presence of everyone who shares the wound. The house that had started all of this trouble sold to a young couple with small children who didn't know its history. Driving past it one day, I saw toys in the yard and laundry on the line. Normal family life happening in the space where our family had unraveled. "It's better this way," Patricia said when I mentioned it. "Houses should hold happiness, not secrets." Even she seemed to understand that some endings are really beginnings. Patricia's gambling urges still come in waves tied to stress or loneliness or family tension. She's learned to call her sponsor, to remove herself from triggering situations, to be honest about her struggles before they become crises. "I'm not cured," she tells people who ask about her recovery. "I'm just honest now about what I'm dealing with." It's a humbler way of being than the confident matriarch she used to perform. Our family photos tell the story of our transformation in ways that words can't capture. The formal portraits from Christmas past, everyone smiling perfectly in coordinated outfits, look almost foreign now. Our recent pictures are messier, more real. Patricia's face showing her actual age, David's smile reaching his eyes, Emma looking relaxed instead of visiting. Less pretty maybe, but more truthful. What I've learned about families is that they're more like ecosystems than structures. When one major element changes, when lies become truth, when secrets surface, when trust breaks and rebuilds, everything else shifts to accommodate the new reality. We're not the same family we were before that Sunday dinner, but we're not broken either. We're just different, more honest, more careful with each other in ways that feel both protective and loving. Looking ahead feels different now than it did when we thought we knew who everyone was and what our future held. There's less certainty, but also less pressure to maintain perfection. David and I talk about having children someday, about what kind of grandparents Patricia and Emma would be, about how to build traditions that honor honesty over harmony. Our dreams are smaller now, maybe, but they're built on ground we know is solid. The voicemail that started all of this is still saved on my phone, though I haven't played it in months. Sometimes I think about deleting it, but it feels like important evidence of how far we've all traveled from that moment of desperate deception. Truth changes everything, but not always in the ways you expect. Sometimes the thing that breaks you is also the thing that teaches you what you're really made of underneath all the pretending. 2 years have passed since that Sunday dinner changed everything. And I'm writing this from our new back porch while David plants tomatoes in soil that belongs completely to us. No hidden mortgages, no secret debt, no lies buried in the foundation. It's smaller than his childhood home, but it's honest in ways that feel more valuable than square footage. Sometimes I watch him garden and think about how growth requires truth, about soil conditions, about what plants need, about accepting what won't survive transplanting. Patricia celebrated her 2nd year of recovery last month with a small gathering that would have been unimaginable during the height of our crisis. David brought flowers, Emma made a cake, and I found myself genuinely proud of how far she'd traveled from that desperate woman begging bank managers to hide her shame. Recovery isn't pretty or linear, but watching someone rebuild their life one honest day at a time teaches you things about human resilience that can't be learned any other way. The strangest gift of this whole experience has been discovering that our family is stronger broken and honest than it ever was whole and pretending. David's relationship with his mother is different now. Less idealized but more real, built on who she actually is rather than who he needed her to be. They talk about money openly, about struggles and fears, about the weight of trying to be perfect for people you love. It's not the easy warmth they used to share, but it's more sustainable. Emma has become our family's emotional translator, the one who helps us navigate conversations that still feel fragile. Dad would be proud of how we've handled this, she told David recently, and I watched something in his face relax. Learning to honor his father's memory while accepting that their family wasn't what he'd believed has been David's longest healing process. Some grief takes years to complete, especially when it involves people who are still alive. I've learned to live with being the person who chose truth over peace, though it's not always comfortable. At family gatherings, I'm still the one people approach when they need to confess something difficult, as if I've been designated the family repository for secrets. Lauren will understand, they say, and while that trust is meaningful, it's also exhausting. Truth-telling is a skill that grows heavier the more you use it, not lighter. Our marriage has deepened in ways I never expected crisis to create. David and I talk about everything now. Money, family expectations, the lies we tell ourselves, the fears we carry about becoming like our parents. We've learned that intimacy isn't just about sharing good things. It's about being honest when life gets complicated. Our love feels less romantic now, but more durable, built on trust rather than just compatibility and shared dreams. The financial counseling sessions Patricia attends have taught our whole family new vocabulary around money and shame, and the stories families tell themselves about worth. Money isn't just numbers, her counselor says. It's emotions and power and family history all wrapped up together. Understanding that has helped us separate Patricia's gambling from her value as a person, though it's taken time to learn that distinction consistently. David started therapy for himself about 6 months ago, not because he was falling apart, but because he wanted to understand how to trust people again without being naive. I don't want to become suspicious of everyone, he told me, but I also don't want to be blindsided again. Finding that balance between openness and wisdom is harder than it sounds, especially when your foundation for evaluating trustworthiness got demolished by the person who taught you what trust meant. Patricia's work with gambling addiction support groups has evolved into something that brings our family unexpected pride. She speaks at community events now, tells her story to help other families recognize warning signs they might be missing. Watching her transform her greatest shame into her most meaningful contribution has been one of the most surprising parts of our healing journey. Purpose built from ruin, but genuine purpose nonetheless. The holidays are different now, smaller and more intentional. We've learned to create traditions that honor honesty over harmony, to make space for difficult emotions instead of just pushing through them. Last Christmas, Patricia cried during dinner while talking about missing David's father, and instead of rushing to comfort her, we just let her be sad. Sometimes love means allowing people to feel their pain fully instead of protecting them from it. Our new house has become a gathering place for other families dealing with addiction and financial crisis. David and I host monthly dinners for Patricia's support group, providing space for conversations that need to happen outside of clinical settings. These evenings are messy and real in ways that our old perfect family dinners never were. Truth shared among people who understand it creates a different kind of warmth than politeness ever could. The couple who bought Patricia's old house invited us to a barbecue last summer, not knowing the history we had with their home. Standing in that backyard where David had played as a child, watching new children run around with no knowledge of the secrets those walls had held, felt like a strange form of blessing. Houses survive family trauma and hold new joy. Maybe people do too, in their own complicated ways. I've started writing about our experience, not for publication, but for processing. There's something about putting difficult truths into words that makes them feel more manageable, less like chaos and more like story. David reads what I write sometimes, adding his own memories and perspectives. We're creating our own family narrative now, one that includes both love and lies, recovery and ongoing struggle, forgiveness without forgetting. Emma has decided to stay in town permanently, building a life that includes being close to family without being overwhelmed by family drama. She's dating someone new, a teacher from her school who knows our story and isn't frightened by complicated family dynamics. I want someone who understands that real families are messy, she told me. Truth attracts people who can handle truth. Performance attracts people who need performance. Patricia's sponsor suggested she write letters to David and Emma about the impact of her choices, not to send, but to process. She shared parts of them with us, words about regret and responsibility that were harder to hear than her original confession, but somehow more healing. Accountability that goes deeper than apology requires looking at consequences honestly, even when they're too big to fix completely. The voicemail that started everything got accidentally deleted 6 months ago when I got a new phone. And surprisingly, I felt relief rather than loss. That evidence of our family crisis had served its purpose, forcing truth when truth was being avoided. But keeping it felt like holding on to pain we'd already learned from. Some artifacts of difficult times deserve to be released once their lessons have been absorbed. David and I talk about having children now in ways that feel grounded rather than idealistic. We discuss what kind of grandparents Patricia and Emma would be, how to build family traditions that honor honesty over perfection, how to teach children that families can survive hard truths. Our dreams are different than they were before the crisis, smaller but more solid, built on what we know rather than what we hoped. What I understand now about families is that they're more resilient and more fragile than anyone tells you. They can survive devastating honesty, but they can't survive persistent lies indefinitely. The version of our family that existed before that terrible Sunday dinner is gone forever, but what we've built in its place feels more genuine. Love based on truth is harder work than love based on illusion, but it's also more trustworthy. Looking back at the woman I was 2 years ago, the one who carried that terrible secret in her pocket and struggled with whether to speak, I want to tell her that choosing truth was right, even though it was painful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in lies that are destroying people you care about. Truth doesn't always heal, but lies always hurt, even when we can't see the damage they're causing. The garden David planted has grown beyond what either of us expected, producing more tomatoes and peppers than our little family can eat. We share the surplus with neighbors and Patricia's support group, fruit that grew from soil we know is clean and foundation we trust completely. Sometimes abundance comes from accepting smaller spaces that are entirely honest rather than larger ones built on shaky ground that was never truly ours to begin with. It's been 3 years since that voicemail changed our family forever, and I'm sitting in the same coffee shop where Patricia once apologized to me, waiting to meet her for our monthly lunch. These regular meetings started as crisis management and evolved into something neither of us expected. Genuine friendship built on mutual respect for truth-telling. She's running late, probably because she stopped to talk with someone from her support group. Patricia has learned that healing happens in community, not isolation. When she arrives, I can see the lightness in her face that recovery has brought. She's 65 now, and the weight of carrying secrets has been replaced by the different kind of tiredness that comes from honest living. Sorry, she says, settling into the booth across from me. Mrs. Henderson from my Thursday group needed to talk through a rough patch. Patricia's ability to help others navigate gambling addiction has become her greatest source of pride and purpose. We order our usual, soup and salad for her, sandwich for me, and she updates me on David's latest garden obsession. He's building raised beds for winter vegetables, she says with the kind of maternal pride that's learned to focus on present reality rather than past expectations. Emma thinks he's becoming his father, but in better ways. The comparison to David's dad doesn't sting anymore. We've learned to separate the man's goodness from his unknowing participation in family secrets. David and Emma's relationship has deepened in ways that surprise me weekly. They talk on the phone every few days, sharing the ordinary details of their lives with an ease they never had before our crisis forced them to be real with each other. Truth creates intimacy, Emma told me recently. Even when it's hard truth. She's getting married next spring to the teacher who fell in love with her complicated family, proving that honesty attracts people capable of handling complexity. I tell Patricia about David's latest project, writing a book about financial literacy for families, born from his obsessive research during the worst months of our crisis. He wants to help people understand the warning signs we all missed, I explain. Not just about gambling, but about family financial secrets in general. What started as his desperate attempt to understand his mother's choices has become a way to help others avoid similar devastation. Our conversation turns, as it often does, to the ripple effects of truth-telling that none of us anticipated. Patricia's honesty inspired her sister to seek help for her own addiction to prescription medication. David's cousin finally left an abusive marriage after years of hiding the truth from family. It's like honesty gave everyone else permission to stop pretending, Patricia reflects, stirring her soup thoughtfully. We've learned that recovery isn't just about stopping destructive behavior. It's about building a completely different relationship with yourself and your family. Patricia's gambling urges still surface during stress, but now she has tools and support systems instead of shame and secrecy. I called my sponsor instead of driving to the casino, she'll tell us after difficult days, and we celebrate these victories as much as any milestone birthday or anniversary. The financial wreckage took 2 years to fully clean up, but Patricia insisted on taking responsibility for every debt she could manage. She works part-time now, and every extra dollar goes toward restitution that will never fully repair what was lost, but serves as ongoing accountability. I can't give David his inheritance back, she said, but I can show him that I understand what I took from him. Small acts of responsibility, building trust, one payment at a time. David and I are expecting our first child in 4 months, news that's transformed our family dynamic in unexpected ways. Patricia's reaction surprised everyone, not the overwhelming joy we expected, but careful gratitude and questions about what kind of grandmother she wants to be. I want to be the kind who tells the truth, she said when we shared our news. Even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient. The baby has given us all something to look forward to instead of just recovering from. Emma has started knitting blankets. David reads pregnancy books with the same intensity he once brought to understanding gambling addiction. And Patricia attends parenting classes for grandparents. I want to do this right, she tells me. I want to be trustworthy with this new person who won't have any reason to doubt me yet. We've talked about what to tell this child about their family history, how to explain Grandmother Patricia's recovery journey in age-appropriate ways. We'll tell the truth, David decided. Maybe not all at once, but we won't lie about who we are or where we came from. Our child will grow up knowing that families can survive hard truths, that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define forever. The support group meetings Patricia leads have become a second family for all of us. I attend occasionally, sharing the perspective of someone who discovered a family member's addiction accidentally. These conversations have taught me that every family touched by gambling addiction has someone like me, the person who stumbled onto truth and had to decide what to do with it. My choice to speak wasn't unique, but it was necessary. Emma recently asked if I ever regret playing that voicemail, if I think our family would be better off if I'd stayed quiet. The question comes up sometimes from people who know our story, usually framed as whether truth is always worth the pain it causes. I regret that it was necessary, I told her, but I don't regret choosing honesty over enabling. Love isn't protecting people from consequences they've created. Sometimes love is insisting they face those consequences with support. Our new traditions reflect who we've become rather than who we used to pretend to be. Sunday dinners are potluck affairs where everyone contributes. Conversations include difficult topics alongside celebrations, and nobody pretends everything is perfect. Patricia brings her sponsor sometimes. Emma brings her fiancé. David and I bring our hopes for modeling authentic family life for the child we're expecting. Messy, real, honest. The house we live in now feels like home in ways David's childhood house never quite did, despite all his happy memories there. This is ours, he says sometimes, meaning not just legally, but emotionally. Built on choices we made together, financed with money we earned honestly, decorated with things that reflect who we actually are rather than who we think we should be. Truth creates different kinds of beauty than performance does. I still keep Patricia's original voicemail saved, not as evidence anymore, but as reminder of how quickly everything can change when secrets surface. Sometimes I listen to it and remember that desperate woman begging for help hiding her mistakes. And I compare her to the person who leads recovery meetings and calls when she's struggling and takes responsibility for rebuilding trust one honest day at a time. People can change, but only if truth creates the space for change to happen. What I've learned about families is that they're more like gardens than buildings. They require constant tending. They grow in unexpected directions, and they're more resilient than they appear when storms hit. Our family weathered the storm of exposed lies and financial devastation, but what grew back is different than what was there before. Stronger roots, maybe fewer flowers, but more sustainable in the long term. The baby kicks as I write this, and I think about what kind of family story we're creating for this new person. Not perfect, not without struggle, but honest about both love and difficulty. They'll grow up knowing that Grandmother Patricia made big mistakes and worked hard to make amends, that families can survive crisis if they choose truth over comfort, that love looks like accountability as much as acceptance. Looking back at the woman I was 3 years ago, the one who found that voicemail and struggled with whether to speak, I want to tell her that choosing truth was the right decision, even though it led to pain none of us expected. Some truths break families apart, but lies break them more slowly and more completely. What we built from the rubble of our perfect facade isn't prettier than what was there before, but it's more honest. And honest turns out to be a better foundation for love than pretty ever was. As I finish writing this and prepare to meet my mother-in-law, a woman I genuinely consider a friend now, not despite our crisis, but because of how we moved through it together, I realize that this story doesn't really have an ending. Families don't get fixed. They just keep growing and changing and learning how to love each other better. Truth didn't save us. It just gave us the chance to save ourselves. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.